to kind of harken back to that comment about I went like 6 years without really processing anything. It feel like even as early as like the funeral, like I feel super guilty about the way that I presented myself in that moment. Not crying, really just like even at the wake, like it I was more just like going through the motions and just saying hi to people.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of The Day After. On today's episode, we sit down with Sarah, who talks about losing her dad almost overnight to a rare infection. Sarah is the wife of a previous guest, Phil, and they are also expecting a child. And she opens up to what it is like to be married, how Phil and her navigated both losing their parents and what it was like for them in their marriage, as well as what it is like for her to be expecting a child. It was a great episode, and we know that you'll enjoy. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
So my loss is centered around my father. Back in 2007, he ended up getting sick with a super rare strep bacteria called necrotizing fasciitis. And it just happened really, really quick. I remember, and my parents are divorced, or they had been divorced for a while. So I would visit my dad every couple days during the week. So it's not like he was around all the time for me to notice that he was getting sick. He called me one night and said that he was in the hospital and completely brushed it off. I don't know if at the time he didn't know how serious it was himself or if he was trying to save me from getting too worried. But he had said something to the effect of, oh, yeah, like, I think it's just a bug. I'll probably be released tomorrow. So don't worry about it. It's, not a big deal. And I was like, okay. It was weird, though, because a part of me like immediately knew, like, as soon as we hung up, I like started crying because I went into like a full blown panic attack. I just knew that there was something off about it. And sure enough, I called, or I woke up for school the next day. I was in the shower at like 6:30 in the morning and I hear the phone ringing and I just knew that it was my dad. I stopped showering. I got out and my mom was like, okay, like, all of his organs shut down overnight. He's on life support. We got to go to the hospital. All in all, it ended up being about 3 days for him to go from calling me saying he was in the hospital to us deciding to to pull the plug, essentially. In that time frame, he had been put in a medically induced coma at the time that his organs shut down. They were like, don't want him to have to deal with this. And he had, I think, 2 surgeries to try to remove dead tissue. He ended up needing arm amputated, leg amputated, parts of his torso, like, removed. This is getting gross. I'm sorry.
But no worries.
You're good.
No worries.
No, you're good.
It's super graphic, but yeah, it was just super traumatic. And I was like, I don't know, in 2007, I think I was like 15.
Mm-hmm.
Holy shit.
So at like one point his like heart stopped. So they brought in all like the CPR stuff. And it was just like a whirlwind that I think I needed to shut down. Like, I don't think there was a way that my brain would have been able to process all of that. So I kind of just shut down at that point and went into survival mode. And yeah, that was really tough. And it just happened so quickly that I don't think I actually started processing that he was gone for a while. I remember immediately after I would still have like the urge, or like it was almost like the habitual like thought in my head, like, oh, this happened, like I gotta tell my dad, or I gotta call my dad, I wonder what my dad's up to. It like wasn't fully registering that he was gone at that point.
That is really fucking traumatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. So you're freshman in high school at this point.
Yep. Yeah, and there's so much going on with that too. I remember like after he had passed away, I feel it was April. So I think like there was, you know how you like transition with semesters and stuff and then you
Yeah.
take new classes. There was like some transitional period where I was entering into a new class and everyone needed to do some sort of like presentation on like their family.
Oh my gosh.
And
Jesus. It always comes at the worst time.
I know, I was like, so my dad's dead. It's like, okay, great. Nice to meet you.
As of a month ago, he's dead. Like
Yeah.
that's a way like, oh God, those I feel like those projects always come around at the worst time.
Yeah.
I feel like
And
we
what
need to get a
was,
little bit more inclusive about those. Hopefully they are in school these days.
I know. And what was super weird, like obviously we found out about this later, like when Philip and I actually started dating, but our like the time frame for like his dad passing away and my dad passing away, it was like within the same year, just like um
Wow.
different months. So
Yeah.
we were in the same homeroom too, but we never really like connected or we weren't really friends.
Mm.
So I don't totally remember him being out and that experience, and he doesn't really remember mine either. So it was just kind of like a weird coincidence that that was happening.
What was the reaction to this news with your friends or those that you were close to?
I don't think a lot of them knew how to be supportive. We were all so young, and I also like completely blocked it out. I don't think I
Mm-hmm.
asked any of my friends for help or support. I pretty much just put on like a normal face and I was like, everything's fine. Like, I'm good. Like, I'm not sad. Like,
Mm.
you know, it is what it is. Like, let's not talk about it.
Yeah.
um, I also didn't have like a ton of friends. I don't know. I didn't have like a close core, like knit group of friends at that time. It was freshman year in high school. So the way our high school was structured was we were all in the same middle school. And then we like branched out to two different high schools. And a lot of my friends ended up going to like the other high school. So I essentially was like also navigating this weird period of needing to find a new friend group. So
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't have anyone to that experience off of.
And are you an only child, Sarah?
Yes, technically. With my dad, it was an only child. Yeah.
But you were living with your mom at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was your mom seeing anybody, remarried or anything like that?
Yep. My mom remarried to my stepdad, who's amazing. Him and I connect on his dad passing away when he was younger from cancer.
Oh, wow.
So when this all kind of went down, I think he really wanted to try to step in and kind of take like that role, not that role over, because he also came from like a blended family. And I think he knew the sensitivities around
Yeah.
trying to like be like, oh, I'll be your replacement dad. Like it was never like that, but it was tough being a teenager. You kind of assume that that's what they're trying to do. So I think him and I had like a weird sort of "you're not my dad" vibe going
Yep.
there for a little while.
Yeah.
That's really natural though. I feel like or in any parent. I remember my stepmom just kind of being like, I'm never gonna like she kind of made it very clear to be like, I'm never gonna replace your mom and that's not what I'm trying to do. But even as a kid, I think you're just I don't know, sometimes it's hard to see that because you're just like,
Mm.
you aren't my mom. Like
Right.
even though you're coming into our life and like you're a mom to two of the people that live in this house. And in my case, I think it's still something that's a little bit difficult and just a different
Yeah.
dynamic that, like no one else in your life, I'm sure, or at least for me, like was going through that, especially when you're talking about a deceased parent. Sometimes
Right.
there's situations in which like a parent gets remarried and like it really is like the dad because the dad might not be active in their lives or whatnot. But I think it's it's difficult for all parties involved, really, that role.
Yeah.
How did it affect the relationship with your mom?
It what my mom and I didn't have the best relationship we still kind of have like a love-hate relationship where like when we love each other, it's like we are best friends. But then we get into
Mm.
these blowout fights. Like we're just so similar and we're so hard-headed that our fights are like not great. um,
Yeah.
but I do think like in my older years, I think we both like I understand her a little bit more and some of the like stressors that she was probably going through with
Yeah.
raising me. I wasn't difficult in the sense that I was like a troublemaker or anything like that. I was just like very hard headed and kind of bitchy especially when I was 15. Um, but yeah, and she was very blunt, I would say, a lot of the time with my dad. There was a time period where I felt like I wanted to like stand up for him because they did have kind of like a difficult divorce. There was infidelity involved with it on my dad's side.
Mm.
So my mom kind of had some not so great feelings about him. She was there and supportive through the hospital experience for me. But I remember there being conversations where we would get into fights and she would kind of do like the whole I'm your only parent type of argument. And she's like, I'm here, like, you know, your dad's not. And that would be like a pain point for both of us because I'd be like, well, you know, he's not here to defend himself. And she would kind of allude to him not being like the best parent when he was around. He's
Mm-hmm.
not completely involved, not the best father. So there were some fights around that.
How did that evolve over the next 4 years of your career at high school?
Um, it's all such a blur, honestly. I feel like there was like this pocket of time with high school where I was just distracting myself with all of the things that, you know, are easy to distract yourself with high school boyfriends, friend groups, drama with other
Yeah.
girlfriends. There's just like, I don't even really remember going to therapy for it or anything. I think I really just compartmentalized it completely. And I remember when we were still at the hospital, my uncle had said something. I think it was after we had like pulled pulled the plug. He had said something like, "This will hit you out of nowhere." Like we were talking about like
Mm.
I don't I don't know if I had told him like, you know, I feel weird, like I don't feel like I'm processing this. And he had said something to the effect of, you know, it'll hit you out of nowhere at some point in your life, like it'll hit us. And I think I think the moment that I started to think more deeply about it was actually when Philip and I started dating because we would actually probe each other for information and have deeper conversations.
What age did you guys start dating?
Um, it was 2013, so I was I think 21 or 22.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this was after high school.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
do know he mentioned when we interviewed him that he was like, saw you and was convinced that he was going to be with you. Yeah.
Yeah, that was news to me.
Yeah, you saw each other out at a party or something. Like definitely after college.
Yeah. So we in high school, we were in the same homeroom together and we had, I think, one class together. And he sat behind me in this class and I guess he was infatuated with me at this point,
Yes,
but I had
yes.
no idea. I was dating someone else, an older boy in high school, and I was always off the market.
I
But
think he said he was really fat and he didn't think he even had a chance with you.
he did look very different when we reconnected. But yeah, we reconnected actually on I was on vacation with my boyfriend at
was
the
it.
time. This is yeah, it was super scandalous. I was in another relationship and he was the homewrecker. So
That's awesome. And now you guys built a home together and a
absolutely.
family. That's amazing. So you went fast math here, not going to be great. So you were 15 and you said you were 21, so 6 years you went without really acknowledging or kind of thinking about your grief and everything you went through.
It feels that way. Um, it feels like there was like this weird experience that I had like once though in like 2012 or something where I had had a dream and it was like one of those really classic, like this was like a visitation type dreams with my dad. And it was like, it was so weird because like with normal dreams, like there's like weird scenarios and like there's like a setting and some weird shit's happening. But it was like we were floating just like in white space. Like there was like nothing
Oh,
else. And I just like saw like his face and he was like super like healthy looking. He was like glowing. And there was no words spoken at all. There was no sound, no nothing. And all he did was like kind of like cup his hands like over my face and
Mm.
smile. And like that was it. It was like
wow.
super emotional. And it was weird because like I wasn't like thinking about him very much at the time, but a lot of stuff kind of like rolled in after that in terms of like, graduating school, finding my first job, meeting, like having Phillip, like it was almost like he came in to say, you're going to be fine. And I support you through like this journey. That's at least how I interpreted it.
That's beautiful.
So, do you remember what it was like to wake up after that dream?
Yeah, it was, I had like thought about it all day. It just felt so unlike any experience that I had had before in a dream. And I think I woke up from it and then went back to sleep and it was like I was still thinking about it. So my
Yeah.
dad showed up like but it was like in like an actual dream. So there was like no nonsensory going on with it. But yeah, it was really intense and I've never had another experience like that ever again.
I had the same thing. One
Did you really?
time, yeah, one time. Also at a time that was pretty like just I was temporarily back in the US and then I ended up not being temporarily back in the US because here I am. Thanks, Nate. And it was like, first of all, the most vivid dream I've ever had. And I don't ever really remember my dreams, but it was very similar where like I woke up and it was like still a little too early to wake up. And I was like,
Yeah.
I got to go back to sleep. But also, I can't forget about this. So I was like replaying it in my head. And then I went back to sleep and I was like, okay, if I wake up and like still remember this, like, that was like it happened. I didn't just like, I don't know. I
Mm,
don't know
Yeah.
why I thought I would have made it up. You don't make that shit up. Like I feel like I might have told the story in another episode, but like she had
yeah.
pointed out like I was wearing nail polish at the time and I had like literally just gotten my nails done
Hmm.
and like had said something to me. And so it was just, yeah, it was like, and it was a kind of, I think it was around the time of her birthday and her death anniversary are like a month apart. So it was right around that time too, like not long before it. And not long before like Nate and I officially started dating, which I say
Hmm.
officially, it was literally like, he was like, we should date. And I moved in like
Yeah.
2 months later. So here I am. So it was like a message of like, life's about to change. But it
Yeah.
was like, yeah, it was an unreal experience and has not happened since. And it did not happen any time before that.
Yeah.
So I think like I like cherish that moment. And like there's a picture that she looked exactly like what she looked like in this one photo that we have of her. And I just like constantly look at that photo just to like remember or think about that photo just to remember it.
Yeah. Cause that's exactly how it was with me too. Like he just looked so like in his prime,
Yeah.
like the best
Yeah.
that
Mm,
like he could have looked. And it was weird seeing that because like I just remember him just being so like he had a very stressful like last couple of years of his life. It was really hard. So he looked really run down. So it was definitely nice at least to think that he's in a better place and he's finally free from all of that like earthly bullshit.
Yeah. That's literally how I took it. Took my mom's like presence in that dream as well. Like just like
Hmm.
suddenly, you know what I mean? Like had a full head of hair and like looked healthy and all the photos that I
Yeah.
saw from her last few months and even year, like she looked sick. And like even more
Hmm.
sick than I remember like being back in it then.
Yeah.
My aunt showed me this photo and I won't even post it anywhere because I think it's like and not like I mean I probably should post it in the sense that like this is legit like what cancer is like and what CJ's kids and what I had realized and what you went through with like your dad like losing limbs. Like that's a scary and traumatic thing to see your parent like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but yeah, I definitely hold that photo close too, because I'm just like, I think that's just crazy though. Like that was like my normal as a kid, like as a 9-year-old,
Right.
seeing that. But I think when we originally talked, like when we first talked in before, kind of live interview, you talked a little bit about like having guilt, like related
Hmm.
to your dad's death. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think it's guilt, to kind of harken back to that comment about I went like 6 years without really processing anything.
Yeah.
It feel like even as early as like the funeral, like I feel super guilty about the way that I presented myself in that moment. Not crying, really just
Mm.
like even at the wake, like it I was more just like going through the motions and just saying hi to people. And I was still pretty young, so like I was happy to see my cousins and stuff, like, and some of them are younger, so they didn't even process it. And I think I kind of put myself more into like that child mindset of like, oh, let's go hang out like in the other room and just chat and talk and hang out. Like this is boring. Like that was kind of how I at least remember acting during that time. And it was weird to see people crying and I wasn't. Like even in that moment I was like, why am I not like crying during this? But in guilt, I think over not really continuing my relationship with family
Mm-hmm.
after that, or at least I'm constantly like beating myself up over that whole side of the family. I sort of like they all live pretty close in proximity. They all live in town for the most part. But at a certain point, I just like stopped really going. I would see them on holidays, but there was no initiative on my end to really like continue that deeper like family relationship. And my half brother Christian, who my dad had remarried also and had another child with this woman.
Mm.
So Christian is my half brother, and he ended up getting adopted by my aunts. So and he's still in town, but we just really didn't like see each other very much. It was birthdays and Christmas, and that continued on until present day, pretty much. It's kind of one of those things where I feel like it's been so long that it's like, how do you change that habit now? And he's never like been upset about it. I've never been called out on it. So it's kind of like, it's been so long. Like, it's weird to like start reaching out now. Like, how do you change that dynamic? So guilt from different aspects, I guess.
How do you feel if you like think about trying to reach out? What feelings come up?
I think for the longest time, it was a lot of anxiety around it. One of the main reasons why I think I avoided reaching out to him more at the time was because he was still deeply connected to his mother, who I had a kind of like abusive, like she was verbally abusive, and
Oh,
I had no desire to see her after my dad had passed away. I felt like released from that experience, and
yeah.
I was always afraid that she was going to show up, because she did show up a couple times when I wanted to support him. Like I think it was his like confirmation or something. I went back to the house afterwards for the reception, and she ended up being there, and she made like a beeline towards me and just wanted to basically like release herself of any guilt that she had. She's like, I just need to like, it was like super intense, and I was
Uh,
still like 15 or 16 at the time. So I like that like traumatized me. I was like, I have no desire to see this woman ever again. So anytime there was like something around my brother, I was like, is she going to be there? Like just a
yeah.
lot of anxiety.
So it was really out of a sense of self-preservation.
I think so. And I think I also knew that if I were to have a closer relationship with him, it would mean that I would have to probably process more of my dad's relationship. And I don't think I
Mm,
was ready to do that. I always felt like I needed to like talk to him about it for some reason, because he was so young when it happened. I didn't know how much of a memory he had of the experience.
mm,
Mm.
I don't remember him ever going to the hospital. So at least he was saved from that experience. But yeah, I think avoiding processing my own emotions like was one of the number one reasons.
What about now? Do you feel ready to process those emotions and reach out to him?
I think so. He's like a full grown adult at this point. He's able to drink. Like we've done like, we've gone out to dinner a couple times. We're actually gonna get together before the baby comes and have lunch. So it's still slow. I think it's also just at this point now, it's easy to get caught up in my own shit with the baby coming and work and friends. Like, I just have to like make the time for it.
Right. Right. So, okay. So you go through all that, and then you said you met Phil, and that was the first time you feel like you really started to talk about it or begin to process it. What was that experience?
Yeah, I think that was the moment that we realized that we could like, that was like even on like a friend level. I didn't have anyone else that I really processed that with. It felt safe to talk to him about it because he had been through something similar. So I just remember like texting, like we would be texting back and forth constantly about, not like we wouldn't like always talk about like our parents, but it just felt really good to finally connect to someone. Even, yeah, like I didn't really feel comfortable talking to my mom about it, siblings. So he was pretty much the only one that I connected with on that.
And then how long after this friendship and all of this started did you guys decide to become a couple and then get married?
I think that the timing, we started dating, I think within like a couple months of talking. I had said earlier that it was scandalous.
I was gonna say, don't air dirty laundry, CJ. Jesus.
I know.
Hey,
I mean,
you can answer the question however you want. I just asked it.
It was completely platonic for a while.
Yeah.
And never, I had been cheated on, so I didn't want to be like that type of person.
Of
but
course.
So I ended up ending the relationship with my boyfriend at the time, and then immediately started dating him. And there was just, we were pretty open. Like at one point, I think he said like, I just need to be honest with you. Like I have feelings for you that are more than just a friend.
Yeah.
I would love to explore those feelings with you. Like I'd love to show you what a real relationship could be like, because I wasn't he knew that I wasn't happy in my current relationship. And from there it was like me just basically like repressing those feelings. And like eventually I started to just come around to it, but I was too nervous to end things. So he would be like, so did you do it yet? Like, did you break up with him yet? And I wish I did, because he was like not a great boyfriend. And it would have felt like it would have been an empowering moment for me to actually like end it with him. And he ended up ending it with me because I was like kind of obvious that I wasn't really in it anymore. And he knew that I was at least friends with Phil. So I remember he texted me. It was like a 6-year relationship, and he texted me while I was at work. He's like, so I've been thinking, like, I just imagined him like waking up in the morning and like grabbing his phone and being like, I've been thinking, like, I feel like you would be a lot happier if you just like hung out with your friends and like didn't have me like anymore. And I was like, what? Like, I remember like going into full blown like crying and like, oh my God, like, how could you do this to me? But like, I think it was more just knowing that part of my life was ending was more traumatic than not being with him. Like I wanted that to happen, but I had like already lived with him. So I was like processing all of that. Like I gotta move out. I gotta go back to my mom. Like, oh my God, like what am I gonna do? So it was a whole thing.
Yeah, that sounds like it. So then, okay, so now you guys are married.
Yes.
After an extended amount of time and being platonic for a little while and then dating. And I'm curious what the dynamic of the relationship and the marriage was, where you both have lost your dads in very different ways. And what challenges came up where you both could relate to each other, but then like also the differences in how you were processing and expressing things.
Yeah. So Philip, I'm sure he talked a lot about how he processed this, and it's taken him a long time to grapple with it. We come from almost opposite ends of the spectrum, where I was more on like
Mm,
the deny, 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 like let's just pack it away and never talk about it. And he would go through these cycles of deep, deep depression and
mhm.
would just almost want to like sink into a hole, and just like it was around the time that he had actually committed suicide. So just
Yeah.
really feel into those emotions. And I think we had a hard time connecting during those times, because he would be showing emotion that was completely the opposite of how I would process that. So I didn't know how to
Mm,
help him. So I would just kind of freeze up and be like, how do I stop this from happening? Because I feel uncomfortable not being able to like pull you out of this experience. So, and then he would try to probe me more for information around like the time that the anniversary of my dad's death. He would be like, so how do you feel about it?
And you're like, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, it was like only times that we would like be drinking and like get into these like deeper conversations about like grief and processing
mhm.
it, and the relationships that we had with our parents, and that we would actually talk about it. But like around the anniversaries specifically, it became harder.
Mm. So you say it became harder. Is that not the case now? How long have you guys been married?
We've been married for 5 years.
Okay. And you've seen changes in how you guys deal with it?
I think so. I think that him going on medication for his depression really helped him
Yeah.
to level out. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like these drastic shifts where, even on like a relationship, like connection level, he would sink so deep into these depressions that he wasn't really present in our relationship at those times.
Mhm.
And that was like another layer of guilt, where I was like, geez, like he's processing his dad passing away, and I'm concerned about how it's making me feel.
Mm.
So those were some of like the pain points with that, for sure.
Yeah. It's I'm listening to you talk and I think about the experience I had with my wife because I was in a very, very deep depression, suicidal ideations, and she was in your position
Hmm.
where we had a new child coming, we were newly married. So she was pregnant 6 weeks after we got married. We were 21 or 22, so very young. And I just think about those years when she had to care for me when I was in such a deep depression. And it was a lot. And I think, and I know that it was a lot for you to do that. And I think it's amazing that you stuck by his side and having the feeling of like, oh, how is this impacting me? That's normal
Hmm.
because it is a lot to deal with. It's like you're caring for someone who can't care for themselves, right? Like at least my experience with my depression was like I just couldn't feel, I couldn't think, I couldn't connect, I couldn't do anything. It was just like I was just a body floating around in space.
Yeah.
So I think, I just to offer that perspective to you that like I think it's okay that you look at it from your perspective of how is this affecting me?
Yeah. That's super validating, honestly. And we've had conversations post him going on
Yeah.
medication, where he's like, wow, like I don't even recognize the person that I was at that time. Like I had no
Yes.
idea how deep into the depression I was until I got out of it. I remember there was one point where he was still in the depression, and I had tried very gently saying like, this is really hard for me. And he had like blown up on me. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, my depression is like causing you problems. Like,
Mm,
and that was like a slap in the face, because I had felt so guilty about feeling that for so long that I was like, okay, like I can never talk about this ever again. Um, and I had been going through stuff too, like um, during COVID, like it was like post COVID, post me getting laid off from my job, post our dog
mm,
dying. Like we're all like the
yeah.
two of us are just like so in need of support, that, and like I felt like I had nobody to actually support me. Like I needed to
Right.
support myself and him, and he didn't like he wasn't ready to hear it at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely it's a hard thing to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk a little bit about you getting pregnant and what that might come up. But before we do that, it's 5 years you guys were together. You've been married. You know, this was 2007. So it's been some years since your dad passed.
Mm-hmm.
What has your journey been in addressing and dealing with your grief? Like, what have you done? What have you discovered? Where do you feel like you're at right now with your relationship to it and to your dad?
Mm-hmm. So one of the best things that both Philip and I have done since getting married was going to therapy together. And
Mm-hmm.
that has unlocked a lot of realizations on not only how we process grief, but how we have our own defense mechanisms and go into these different modes of
Mm,
like defense in stressful times. She always says like Philip is depression and I am anxiety. So it like we clash a lot in terms of that. But I've also been able to talk to my mom a lot more openly, I would say, since starting therapy too. And one of the areas that I'm still trying to put pieces together is just a lot of my dad was a pretty private person. So it was hard for me to have an opinion on him in our relationship when it was so surface level. And he's not here to defend himself. He's not here to explain why certain things happened. So I was just kind of left to assume. And I remember this was not even that long ago. It was like a couple of weeks ago, actually. But my mom and I were just talking, and she was like, "Did I ever tell you like how I found out that your dad was cheating on me?" And I was like, "No." Like, and it was
mm,
weird. It was a weird revelation because I never asked, and she never like brought it up. So I think through the process, like her and I have been talking more, which has been nice. But where I feel about my dad right now is like another layer of grief or guilt, I should say, where I kind of have a lot of information to put to the pieces together that like while he did his best to try to be a good parent, like it just wasn't enough.
yeah.
And that's like a hard thing to tell people, especially like it could be another reason too why it's harder for me to connect with my brother, because it's like I have this feeling that, you know, our dad kind of wasn't there for us, and I don't know how he feels about my dad. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a weird place to be.
Yeah. If your dad was here right now, what are the things you would want to ask him or talk to him about?
I think number one would be like, where were you when like my stepmom was not treating me well? There were
Yeah.
times where she would be super verbally abusive, which I know he wasn't there for all of that, and I wasn't like telling him what was happening, but like she was locking me in my room for like 12 hours at a time. So it's like he had to have
Fuck.
known that like that was happening. So like I would have wanted some clarity on like how that ended up
Mm-hmm.
happening. And I've talked to my mom about it, and of course like my mom's not my dad, so I still don't have the answers from him, but she just kind of felt like he didn't want to rock the boat with her because she was so like clinically insane. There was another time where got she just had like a breakdown, and it got so bad that my dad had to like physically remove me from the house, and we had to like go sleep at a
Holy
hotel.
shit.
So it was bad. And I think a lot of my time with my dad was centered around her. So there's a lot of really like uncomfortable memories associated with my dad because she was involved.
That's a lot to process.
Yeah.
Where do you feel like you are in relationship to all of it right now? Do you feel like you're at the beginning, the middle? Do you feel like you've had breakthroughs? Do you feel like you're able to sit with it now and not compartmentalize everything? Or
I think I can I am so much more open to learning more about it and being open about it with people. I think that's all I can ask for at this point. It's not like I feel like the process is complete by any stretch.
yeah,
I still think that, even the fact that I started to feel cold feet about even coming on this podcast, because these are conversations that I haven't had with anyone on my dad's side of the family and my brother
Yeah.
that like, do they even know that there was like abuse going on in the house? Do they even know like anything about all of this and what was going on? So it it's a lot, and I don't know if I'm totally ready to have those conversations with them, but I would be open to learning more about my dad. Because you know, prior to me basically existing, like he like seemed like such a fun person. And my mom can
Mm.
attest to that. Like it was one of the, main reasons why she fell in love with him was just he was such a funny, outgoing guy, super fashionable, just like the life of the party. Even like the home videos that I have, like he's just so funny. There was this one video of him on like a golf trip in Florida with his brothers and some friends, and he always was behind the camera. He wanted to narrate everything and capture everything on camera, and he was taking a video of like the hotel that they were staying at in the 80s, and it was right on the water, and he was pointing the camera at this glass door that led out onto a patio, and there was like a partition in between. So he like pans the camera to the left and he's like, so you got the Atlantic Ocean over here, and then you have the Pacific Ocean over here. Wow, this hotel has everything. Like, that's some like weird thing that I would do. I don't know.
What does it feel like to recognize your dad's traits in you?
I guess like it's like nice, I kind of feel neutral about it. It's almost like, well, yeah, of course, like I would expect there to be traits because he is my dad.
Yeah.
I think I get all of my anxiety from him, unfortunately. That was like always like, and it kind of caused like more issues with me and my mom, I would say, because she had to deal with my dad's anxiety for years. And then when she found out that I was a basket case too, she was like, oh my God, like here we go again. So she didn't have much patience for me when I was navigating learning about anxiety. It was just get over it. You're fine. Nothing's going to happen.
Yeah. So speaking of mothers, you get pregnant.
Yeah.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
What does that do to all of this for you?
I think like for the most part, I've just been like so afraid to be all of the worst parts of my parents. And I think that's a very normal feeling. No parent is perfect. And you almost want to overcompensate and be like the opposite of what you experienced. But, Philip is, I feel like Philip has processed his dad a lot deeper than I have. Unfortunately, he had to go through a lot more shit to get there. But he's very like sure of himself as a parent, and he knows what he wants her to experience from him. And I'm still a little unsure, I guess. It's harder for me to picture myself as a mom at this point. I know I got to get there because she's going to be here in a couple weeks, but it's just, I think, a lot to imagine myself in that role now.
What is a lot?
Just like never feeling prepared enough. I know she's going to be tiny and she's not going to have an opinion of me for a couple of years, but just trying to figure out what type of parent I want to be. And I tend to, because I do have so much anxiety, I think I tend to overcomplicate everything. I'm like learning so much and I'm like, I gotta be a gentle parent, but like I still have like, I feel like I have like anger issues. Like sometimes I forget my dog's medication. How am I gonna be like, I did actually forget her medication today at 2, god damn it. Like, how am I gonna be able to like keep this kid alive? Like just a lot of anxiety, but still obviously excited. But Philip, I think, is kind of my anchor through it because he's just so confident in it. So I'm kind of just like holding on to him through this.
As your rock, essentially. Yeah, to keep you steady.
Yeah.
You mentioned like you're not prepared enough, but what preparation would you want to feel secure going into it?
It's all just like silly stuff that really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I keep trying to remind myself all she's going to need is a place to sleep. She needs diapers, she needs a changing, and she needs to eat. Like those are the bare minimum things I need to be providing right now. She doesn't need a perfect nursery. She doesn't need, you know, the dogs don't need to be perfectly trained right now. Like, just overwhelmed with stuff that doesn't actually really matter.
Controlling the environment.
Yeah, a lot of lack of control has been kind of the theme of this pregnancy.
What about that lack of control makes you feel so anxious?
Um, prior to getting pregnant, I definitely have struggled with disordered relationship with my body, and the thought of getting pregnant was terrifying to me for pretty much right up until we both decided like it was a good time to try. A lot of it did have to do with Philip's depression, and because he had been asking for a kid for a couple of years, and I had always said no because I felt like all of the responsibility was going to fall on me. I had to take care of myself. I had to take care of him. Bringing a kid in, like, obviously, like, I'm going to be like the default parent at that point. So it took me a long time to get to that point where I felt like we were ready. But I still had these body issues where I knew that pregnancy was not going to suit me emotionally or physically. So just knowing that all of these changes were going to happen and there was nothing I could do about it, once it happened, was a lot to come to terms with. But learning how to just take things day by day and not put myself so far in the future has been helpful. I'm not perfect at it, but it's definitely the one exercise that I'm trying to do.
What is body dysphoria? You said disordered?
Yeah.
Or do you mean dysmorphia?
Like just like a disordered relationship with my body. I was in the gym like every day doing like calorie counting, just trying to make myself into the perfect version of what I felt comfortable. Like I exercised so much control over my physical body that to be thrown into this, overnight, basically, like you get that positive pregnancy test and it's like, you can't count calories anymore. You can't, you got to tailor back your exercise. You're going to gain weight. Like you can't lose weight anymore. Now you're going to gain weight. It was just so much to process in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, I can not relate to the pregnancy, but I've had a long history of disconnection and body dysmorphia. And that's definitely been a fight that is, come a long way at this point. Yeah. For me, it was really this sense that if I'm not this ideal of what I think my body should look like, which is an impossible ideal because it's always changing, to me, it was connected to that I'm not worth loving.
Yeah.
So if I couldn't be this, then nobody's going to love me. If I'm not, the smartest, nobody will love me. If I'm not the best, if I don't look the way that I think my body should look, then I'm unlovable. So it was a lot of that for me.
Yeah. I think I resonate with that too. Understanding that there was never going to be a time where I felt like completely complete and whole in my body, I think was like that realization that it's like, it's not the six pack that you want. It's
It's just the sense of being enough, right?
Yeah.
That's what I've been exploring, is like, what is enough and how do we get there and how do we believe it and feel that?
Yeah.
Is there any amount of fear or stuff that comes up becoming a parent, losing a parent, and being worried like, okay, Phil lost his dad, you lost your dad. Is this child going to go through what we went through?
I think like obviously my dad passed away from a really fluke, like rare situation, but he was also not super present as a parent. So I think on my end, it's just like this fear of being a disconnected parent where Phil, his dad chose to leave.
Right.
So he's constantly like worried about having like just basically being subject to the same fate. There's always this fear of like, what if I end up just like my dad?
Yeah.
In between my two biological parents, my dad was not perfect, not very involved. And my mom was emotionally, I think, stunted.
Mm,
So there's just a lot of there's a lot of baggage that we're bringing into bringing a kid in, and so much pressure to like not have her have the same experience. And we both have
yeah.
these defense mechanisms that we're working through actively. But I think that, we're all three of us are going to be growing together, and it's just going to be a learning process. And at least we're aware and we're going to therapy. So
Yeah.
breaking generational curses is definitely what we want to do.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are both so committed to your growth, so committed to your healing. That's only naturally going to come into your parenting. And
Hmm.
the fears are normal. I definitely had my fears, and that's a story for another day. But it's like, it's that commitment to healing, like you said, and that awareness that is going to allow you guys to not fall into those traps that you're so concerned about. But
Yeah.
that doesn't stop you from worrying about them.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah,
And I know I'm going to beat myself up the first time I lose it and
100%.
like yell at her. I'm going to be like, "Oh my
Yeah.
God, I'm just like my mom." Um, but it's going to happen. I just have to give myself grace.
I literally just did it 2 days ago. Like, things have been so good. There's a lot of decisions that I made in my life to allow myself to have more emotional energy for the kids and everything. And
Hmm.
like, I'm starting to see what I want in my life with myself and my kids. And as I was just like reflecting on the growth and the healing and all this amazing stuff the other night, it was like, I hear my two boys fighting, and my instinct, I ran in and I just started screaming and
Hmm.
yelling. I'm like, "You're fucking grounded. No more shit for the rest of the week. Don't ever fucking do that shit again." And then I like walked in my room and I was like, fucking hell.
Like,
Like,
what
I
was that?
just had to go off, you know? So then it's like, now I got to walk in the room, tail between my legs. And it's just like, listen, my older son pushed my younger son. I was like, you guys, I'm like, that fucking scares me. I
Yeah.
don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to injure each other. Like, that could be life changing
Hmm.
just because of a split decision to push somebody because you're angry instead of using your words.
Yeah.
But then it's like, I'm reacting out of fear and being
Hmm.
scared, but it for sure happens all the
Yeah.
time.
I've realized that like a big chunk of my anxiety is like being overstimulated. And we have two big dogs that fight all the time. Not fight, but like they play fight all the time. They're just
Yes.
big and in the way. And I just like my I think it's probably also because I'm like super emotional and pregnant, but like my my switch is so like I have such a short fuse where I just go off. And I think like I remember times where my mom would get really, really mad at me and go off on me too. But what I want to try to do, because it's going to happen, I'm going to be a
Yeah.
psychopath at some point, but just being able to being able to apologize and
Mm,
take accountability is something that was sorely lacking, I think, in my childhood. um, I always say, like, I don't recall times where my mom has actually apologized for like anything.
mm,
We kind of just developed this relationship where we acknowledge that we don't want to be mad at each other anymore and we just move on. So I think what I would have wanted would have been moments where it was like, hey, like we both said things that we
yeah.
don't mean. I'm sorry that I said that or did that. So accountability is my biggest goal.
That's awesome. No, it's beautiful. So, there's a couple of things that we didn't get to. One, I'm curious if there's any rituals or things that you do that if you want to kind of tap back in, connect with your dad. I know there was like a disconnect when he was here. I'm just
Hmm.
curious if there's anything that you do now to try to reconnect with him.
Yeah, I feel like learning about him would be like the first thing. I have some home movies that I haven't watched in a while that I would probably want to watch again at some point, but just continuing to have more open conversations with family members about him and learning more about him would be an awesome way to connect with him. So it's not that I've started it, but it got your question got me thinking about ways that I could start doing that more.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then lastly, is there anything that you would want to say to somebody who's in your position or caring for somebody that's in your position?
Yeah, I guess just really like give yourself grace
Mm,
is the biggest thing that I've had to learn. Nobody's perfect. There's no right way to grieve, which is, I think, why I was so, you know, attracted to the platform that you guys have. It's putting all different spectrums on the
mm,
table. And I think for the longest time, I just assumed that I just did the whole thing wrong and that I had something to apologize for that. And that's not the case. So grief is really complicated, and
yes.
we we don't even know like how to handle our own emotions most of the time.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for
Yeah, it was
sharing.
great to have
Yeah.
you.
Thank you that you are willing to open up about all these things. Appreciate it. And yeah, we're grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Day After. You can find this podcast and more at our website at www.thedayafter.com. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you take a moment to leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast.